Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hello and welcome to episode 334 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and today I'm joined by Dr. Antje Bothin, a German-born poet, academic and published author who now calls Scotland home. A member of the Federation of Writers Scotland, Antje's poetry has been featured in Hanny Rowler's international showcase of female poets, The Sea Belongs to 1,000 Voices. In this episode, we'll explore her book, Annika and the Treasure of Iceland, and how it fosters a deeper understanding of selective mutism. Antje will share insights into the story, its inspiration, and why the representation of selective mutism in literature is so important. And with that said, let's roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and a very warm welcome to episode 334 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Both Rory Oakes and myself, Ken Kelly, warmly welcome you to our three topics, starting off with ethical sustainable practice, where today, a guide for counsellors on managing triggers and flashbacks. Rory has beautifully introduced Practice Matters guest today, where we're going to be delving into the book Annika and the Treasure of Iceland and how it fosters a deeper understanding of selective mutism. And then we go into student services, recognizing you are students, where today, ideal client load for student counsellors in practice. That's going to be an interesting one. But kicking us off, Rory, that ethical, sustainable practice where we speak about managing triggers and flashbacks. So this is obviously related to trauma. And I guess it's a very real and a heavy topic at some level.
Yes, it's a real and heavy topic, and it's a 21st century topic. We spoke on the podcast before about 20th century therapy and 21st century therapy. 21st century therapy, or the theory that underpins it in the research, now makes us more aware of trauma and the triggers that can generate trauma. And triggers are stimuli. There are things like sounds, smells, images, and emotions that can remind a client or a trauma survivor of a past event and activate a distressing response. And these stimuli can be very, very kind of ambiguous things like a loud noise, or even a client's sensations or intrusive thoughts, bodily sensations or intrusive thoughts. So it's really important that if we get a client who is triggered, that we realise that they have flashbacks, and flashbacks are the time machine of trauma. They are that time machine that takes the person back from your therapy room to the time of the trauma, and that can be the trauma itself, what happened, and also it could be the developmental age of the client. So one of the things that I noticed in my practice through the years was that as some clients became triggered, they would they would regress from being adults to children. You could hear it in their voices. They would talk in a childlike voice. And that alerted me to realizing that they were maybe expressing or experiencing flashbacks, and they were being taken back. And it's really important as a therapist that therapy is in the here and now, and that you can walk the client back into the here and now, so that they can feel secure, they can feel not under threat. And to do that, therapists need, quite frankly, some insight into what it looks like, but also some techniques to be able to support clients, Ken.
100%, Rory, and it's I think it's important that we kind of understand the mechanisms that we're speaking about. I like how you've said this is a modern day situation, and I guess it would go back some time that if somebody saw a saber-toothed tiger and they had a bad experience with the saber-toothed tiger when they were out from their cave the one day doing some berry collecting, that when they heard the roar of a saber-toothed tiger in the night, it might trigger them. So I guess it existed within humans for a very long time, but studying this, focusing in on this and recognizing it and looking at how it applies in therapy is very new, very relevant. We speak about how often we've spoken about that in core training, it's not necessarily taught. So we're speaking about trauma. So trauma, just to revisit the definition of that, trauma is not necessarily the event that happened. It is how that event is stored in the body and how that might come to the surface within the here and now. And that can happen from a trigger. And you've mentioned that the trigger it can be a smell, it can be a feeling, it can be a temperature, it can be anything that will relate to, even at a subconscious level, something that maybe happened back in the past. And the trigger can put the person into the flashback, which is re-experiencing moments of what happened. But triggers are interesting. First of all, we very often, if we're delivering CPD on certain topics, we might put in a trigger warning, where we'll say to somebody right at the top, trigger warning, and then we'll talk about very gently what the topic is so that people can opt out of that or prepare themselves as they're going through that training to be more robust. And what I like, Rory, is that when you know what the trigger is, you can work with that because you can see it coming. And then you can put in techniques, and we can share techniques as therapists that will be useful to the client to kind of keep the trigger just as a trigger. It doesn't have to go somewhere. So I'll give you an example of that. My wife has vasovagal. Now, vasovagal is if she sees an open wound or blood, and this can be on the television, she has a biological event that happens in her body where she feels faint, her blood pressure drops, and she feels like she's going to fall down. So if she knows that there's going to be something on the television where they take the scalpel and they're about to go in, she knows how to manage that by looking away. If she has to go for a procedure where they might be needing to cut something and there might be some blood or something like that, she has little grounding techniques that she can use so that the triggers don't fully take effect. So I was wondering, if we're speaking about this, Rory, is it appropriate to ask a client what their triggers are, keeping in mind that a client might not understand the terminology of trigger, but if we can understand maybe what that is, we can, go some distance with the client?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you have a client who comes to you and they speak about, they want to talk about their traumatic past, I think a conversation, a thoughtful therapist would have a conversation and say, okay, that's fine. We look forward to seeing you. Just, is there anything that may trigger you? And I think that question is a pertinent one because they can be very ordinary items. I can't tell you the times that I've covered mirrors up in my therapy room, or someone said, I don't like green, or someone said, I don't like the smell of A, B, C, or D. I mean, if you have a therapy room, you want it nice. And I know some people may spray a nice air freshener in, or have some kind of device that plugs into the socket that creates a nice smell. But if someone is frightened of the smell of roses or certain sounds, you're basically bringing them into a triggering environment. You're going to get triggered as soon as you walk through the door. So I think having a general conversation and see if there's anything that is in your therapy room that may cause a client distress. It's the same technique actually that we use for autistic clients. Exactly the same, because we know that autistic clients sometimes have a hard time with things like smells and sounds and light and that type of thing. And that way we can do two things. We can look at our therapy room and see if we can offer the client that safe space that they want. I mean, if somebody says, I'm afraid of green's a trigger and your whole therapy room's painted green, then that might not be the best place for your client to be, and you might have to have a conversation. But also it gives us information. It gives us a base to work at, so that we're already understanding the client before we meet them. We already have a sense of who this person is. And I think that's so important when working with trauma, because we can welcome them into our therapy room, and we could do it safely, and we could do it with the knowledge that they feel safe. We can say, well, I can say there's nothing like that in my therapy room, because we do know, Ken, that some clients won't come to therapy because they're frightened of being triggered. They're frightened of it. I've certainly had clients who've said that. So again, this 21st century idea of how we work with clients, that idea of asking pertinent questions when we contract with them before we meet them is, I think, very important for me.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, you got that information from the training that you've done. I know you've dived very deep into trauma training yourself before working with trauma, and of course that's always the takeaway that we suggest. If you're going to be working with trauma, go and do the training, the relevant training that's going to give you the skills. When we're talking about the triggers, well, first of all, we're talking now about psychological education in sharing what a trigger is with our client. They may not recognize it as a trigger. We as therapists will look at a piece of CPD and it'll say trigger warning, and we know exactly what that is because we understand the mechanisms. But what the client definitely will recognize is the outcome of the triggers when they find themselves in that highly stressful emotional state, and it can be back engineered, and we can help a client back engineer what the trigger was, what started this, what was the first thing that set this off. Keeping in mind it can sometimes be subconscious and not seen and recognized. You just find yourself in the past and in the emotion of it. And one of the ways of doing it, and it's covered in our handout, is encouraging the use of a trigger journal to recognize patterns within clients, discussing with the client so that we can understand what kind of situations they get themselves in, and trying to understand to help the client see what their own triggers may be. Because as we said at the beginning, if you can spot the trigger or know what the trigger is, there's an opportunity of avoiding or mitigating within the presence of that trigger, which is what I wanted to go on to now, which is one of the ways of helping a client managing the trigger, and that is with grounding techniques. And grounding is a form of mindfulness. Grounding basically is taking yourself and putting yourself very clearly in the present moment, in the here and now. And it's very difficult, in fact can't be done, to experience a past traumatic feeling if you are here, 100% here in the here and now. And but very often the client may, within the trauma and within being swept up in that, be carried by it, almost hijacked by it. So coming back to the here and now is a safe place, because nothing is going on within the present moment. It's just them in the room or online with you working and getting them into the here and now. Grounding techniques. One is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method, encouraging clients to name 5 things that they can see right now. So right now in the room, what are 5 things that you can see? And the reason this works is because it brings them here, that I now have to be here and put my focus and my concentration on what is here in front of me. 4 things that you can touch within the room right now. What can you touch? And it really is, it's that the person is here touching the things, then asking them 3 things that you can hear. Maybe they can hear your voice. Maybe they can hear the birds outside. Once again, they're in the here and now. 2 things that they can smell and 1 thing that they might be able to taste. So that is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But the purpose of that really is a grounding, mindful technique to break the almost hijacked thinking and being in the emotion and being carried away by it, and bringing the person back into the here and now. Calm breathing also works, and there are a number of mindful techniques which we've covered in the podcast before, and even physical movement, Rory, as you know, and you put it into the handout. Stretching, walking, standing up, moving your arms around. It's just stop that thinking, stop being hijacked, and come into this present moment. Grounding techniques, really good within that trigger.
Absolutely. And in my studies in trauma-informed therapy, I began to understand that what you're trying to do, certainly with the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, is you're taking people out of that emotional part of the brain, which is the autopilot of our behavior. Once we're in that emotional middle part of our brain, everything else is switched off. We are now in that time machine. Now we're there at the time of the trauma. We're experiencing it. We can feel it, everything around. In some cases, some people can even see it. We're taking the client away from that, and we're moving them in to the top of the brain, so that they can actually function more. And I'll give you an example of this. That happens to, I think, possibly most people who are listening to this podcast, most of the listeners, is that have you ever lost your keys? You know, you're on your way out, you're very busy, it's a very busy day, and you've lost your keys, and all of a sudden you can't find your keys, you get into a panic, and you're panicking away, and you're going, where have I put them? I can't look up, I'm going to be late, this is going to have a knock-on effect. We've all been there. And interestingly enough, what happens is that you go into that kind of middle part of your brain, and you start switching off the top part, the thinking cap, as my granddad used to say. Put your thinking cap on, lad, he used to say. And what he really meant was the top part of the brain. And, you know, you sit down and you think, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then all of a sudden, as you're moving around and you sit down, you notice that the key is actually on the kitchen table. Happens to me all the time. And then you pick it up and you get on with your life. And that's a good example of how our brains work. And we go on to say, you know, develop a coping plan. If someone is struggling with trauma, to develop a coping plan. One of the things I used to do, if I work with clients who regularly had flashbacks, was to get them to print out the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method and put it on their fridge. I used to call it fridge therapy. So that if they're on their own and they find themselves sliding back for some reason, could be anything, could be a sound outside, could be something on the TV. They have a very quick way of finding the technique and practicing it. Because if you can arrest that movement back in time, you can keep yourself in the here and now, and that's the important thing. And one final thing, Ken, is that not all clients will come to you and say they've got trauma. They will come and it will become apparent as they discuss something, or as they look at something, or all of a sudden they will become very frightened or very withdrawn. And I think a curious therapist, a compassionate therapist, asks the right questions. Can you tell me what's going on for you now? And if a client says, it's that, I can hear something outside that reminds me of the trauma. A car backfiring can be, for a lot of ex-military, quite scary. Fireworks, that type of thing. And you could then activate your trauma-informed skill set to be able to bring the client back into the here and now in the service of them. It's because no one wants. You can't do therapy with a disassociated client. If they're back in time and they're completely lost in the trauma, then you're going to have some difficulty bringing them back. So, developing a coping plan is really important, I think, and also includes self-soothing techniques. Who's your safe people to contact? Do you have any people you can speak to? What's your wider network like? And what is it that keeps you safe? I had a colleague who did colouring books. She would carry a colouring book, a child's colouring book with her, and pens and coloured pens. And if she felt herself having a bit of a bad day, she would use the colouring book, and that would completely fill her mind up of colouring and would keep her safe. So we can see that there's so much more to being a trauma-informed practitioner than we might have first thought when we started this. We started this conversation, Ken. It's a set of skills that is taught trauma-informed practice, and it really is in the service of your client.
Couldn't agree more. In fact, the very handout that we're working from today that you can download, and we'll give you the address of that in a moment, is taken from the course that you built, Rory. It actually references Lees Oaks R 2023 Trauma Informed Practice course. And if you're interested in that, the link is actually in the handout, so you can go and have a look at that, or just go to counsellingtutor.com. It's interesting, when you were speaking about recognizing this within a client. So it's unlikely that a client's going to come in and say, hello, it's great to meet you, my counsellor. And the reason I'm coming here is because I have trauma and I experience triggers and flashbacks. That's very rare that's going to be a presentation. It's going to come down to, can't believe I'm going back to level 2 basic counselling training here, Rory. Active listening. Now, if you remember the lessons on active listening, it wasn't just the words. You can gain so much from a client. If you are in the room with a client or online and you can clearly see that client and you're connected with that client and you are actively listening, you're going to see maybe a change in their breathing. Maybe they start wringing their hands. Maybe they start showing responses that we would might link into a trauma response of some kind. And it's then that we can inquisitively inquire, like you said, Rory, be a curious therapist. But it's interesting how it goes back to the most basic of basics of the active listening and seeing and recognizing the whole client within that moment. And what's interesting in the helping of managing clients with triggers, you linked this, Rory, to a different training course we do, which is being an autism aware practitioner. And so much of it is similar in the self-soothing, in having a plan for the client when they find themselves in a difficult situation, and keeping themselves robust by the things that they like to do. It might be listening to music. You mentioned the coloring books, and it's very similar with autism. If a person maybe has a meltdown or is struggling within a session, we understand beforehand, before this moment, what the exercises are that will regenerate this person and that will add points in again. And it's so similar how that crosses over. And I think I understand the mechanism behind that within an autistic individual. There's often so much trauma of having to face life as a neurodivergent individual and live in a different world that you're not adapted to, and you have to create your own techniques and ways of being able to deal with that, and it's very traumatic. So something we see quite often, if you are working with a neurodivergent individual, you're going to see trauma. So we've spoken about managing triggers and flashbacks, a guide for counsellors understanding triggers and flashbacks. It's a handout taken from our trauma-informed practice training course. It's yours. You can have it. It's free to download. Go to counsellingtutor.com. That's our website. We have loads of handouts and downloads on that site, so it's really worth going. Use our search bar and search stuff. But in this instance, you just want to click on Podcast tab, find your way to episode 334. That's today's episode, and you can download it. It is free of charge. It has everything we've spoken about and a lot more. It starts by defining triggers and flashbacks, the importance of trauma-informed training, and then it speaks about helping clients manage the triggers, increasing that awareness, the grounding techniques, and developing a coping plan. And then it starts going into supporting clients through flashbacks, which we haven't even covered today, Rory. The orient to the present, using grounding as again and containment strategies, teaching a safe place imagery, integrative cognitive strategies, and encourage connection. So there's a lot in this. It's a really in-depth handout. It's useful. Download it, have it on hand, read over it, and then have the discussions with your peers of what comes up for you with that. Yeah. Any final thoughts, Rory, as we back out of trauma-informed?
I think you don't have. It doesn't mean altering your practice dramatically. It doesn't mean that you have to just discount everything you've learned. If you're a person-centered therapist or maybe you're an integrative therapist, you don't have to discount everything you've learned. What you have to do is you have to weave in the trauma-informed practice element. You just weave it into your practice. And, just little things like normalizing the fact that people will have triggers. I can't tell you how many times people have said, I don't know why this happens, and I feel really silly. It's ridiculous. And by normalizing it and say, well, this is how the brain works. This is what happens. And you're not on your own. And it happens to a lot of people. That side of it, that feeling silly, that shame side can be negated. So important. And I think the other thing is, I'll just pick up finally on what you're saying about active listening. Active listening is the most important part of therapy, really listening to the music behind the words, the melody, if you like, and the lyric. The lyric is what's being said. The melody is the emotional delivery of what's being said. And I think a trauma-informed therapy is really used to hearing when the melody is starting to really impact on the person who's speaking, when it becomes really, really hard. And at that point, if you can step in, to use a musical term, I guess what you're doing is you're doing an infill. You're filling in, like musicians might play a guitar to fill in something. And that's what you're doing, and it can be in so much service. And I would say, please, please, please share this podcast far and wide with all your peers, because I'm sure that when those people download that handout, immediately it's going to have an effect on the way they practice. Share it with your supervisor as well. But a very important 21st century handout for 21st century practitioners.
Yeah. Thank you, Rory. I'm going to just give you it one more time where you get it. counsellingtutor.com, click on podcasts, go to episode 334. It's there. You can download it. It's free. If you're interested in training to be a trauma-informed therapist, you want to have a look at our course, same place, counsellingtutor.com. You'll find it there. All the information. Download the handbook, and it's got it all there for you. So that was ethical, sustainable practice for today. Great topic. Thank you, Rory. And now on to our author for today. And the book, Annika and the Treasure of Iceland, and how it fosters a deep understanding of selective mutism.
Yes, well, I had the delightful pleasure of spending some time with Dr. Antje Bothin, who is a writer and a poet, and who has a personal experience of selective mutism. And she tells a great story of how she's written a book called Annika and the Treasure of Iceland, and how it can foster a deeper understanding of selective mutism for those of us who might meet clients with that presentation. I caught up with her, and this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Joining us today is Dr. Antje Bothin, author, academic and poet, whose latest book, Annika and the Treasure of Iceland, takes readers on an immersive journey through adventure, history and the mysteries of the Nordic world. But this isn't just an adventure story. It delves deeper into psychological themes, including selective mutism. Through the character of Annika, Dr. Bothin explores the experience of a child navigating the world with this anxiety-related condition, shedding light on its challenges and its strengths. In our conversation today, we'll discuss the inspiration behind the book, the portrayal of selective mutism, and how readers can use it as a therapeutic tool to gain deeper understanding of how to work with clients with this presentation. So we welcome Dr. Antje Bothin.
Thank you for having me. I wrote this book because I myself have lived experience of this and I want to help people. And I know there are a lot of books for young children, like picture books, but there was nothing really for teenagers or young adults. So I decided to create a story for them and giving such people a role model. So my book, Annika and the Treasure of Iceland, is about a treasure hunt in Iceland, and it features a character that struggles with speaking in certain situations, and I show the challenges she faces and how she overcomes her anxiety.
So I'm guessing that so it's aimed at maybe young people, maybe teenagers who are struggling with selective mutism. So it's written for them. And the book really, having read the book, it feels to me like this is a person they could identify with, that they may see themselves in. Would I be right in that?
Yeah. And it also gives you an idea what selective mutism is and how you would recognize it and how it feels from a lived experience perspective, so to say.
Yes, and I guess that brings me on to my next question. So, therapists who are listening to this, how may it help understand client challenges, clients who they may see in their practice rooms who are selectively mute?
Yeah, I think selective mutism is a relatively unknown condition in the general public and even with professionals. So that also brings me to my other book, Quiet, a poem about selective mutism, which I wrote for more awareness in general. So October is Selective Mutism Awareness Month, and a couple of years ago, I just published this like a stanza every day for awareness, and then I put it in that book. But in terms of therapists, I think it gives a good overview about what this person experiences, what she thinks and feels, and how she shows what she does and how she interacts with another person or other characters in the book. So I put things in there that are typical signs of selective mutism, but I put it in the story so that it is not that obvious like a textbook or something. It's really a story that is also intended to entertain and educate.
Yeah, it's I'm going to pick up on what you said earlier, that it's quite a relatively unknown or undiscussed phenomenon. The first time I came across it was when I read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, because the character in that book, Maya Angelou, who was a real person, it was a biographical book, was speaking about her own experiences of selective mutism. And I don't know if you've come across this, but she was severely abused as a child. And what happened was that the local townspeople found the abuser and killed him. And she actually thought her words were so powerful they brought death. So she withdrew from speaking until she was 12 or 13. So I guess the question I'm asking, is selective mutism a response to trauma, or can it be linked to more of a neurodiverse kind of presentation in people. I know my grandson doesn't speak. I've got a 9-year-old grandson. He's autistic and he doesn't speak at all. He does lots of pointing, but he doesn't speak. And I'm just wondering, is there, from a therapist's point of view, can we try to make sense of the origins of why someone may be selectively mute?
I would say it's a complex condition and it can be individually different, the reasons. So it can be inherited, like there's anxiety in the family, but that doesn't necessarily need to show as selective mutism in everyone. And then there's the other side, the environment and how the person grew up and the people around them and what everyone did. And in terms of selective mutism, it is usually seen as a phobia of speaking. So you may imagine like small triggers in young age when something was related to speaking that was unpleasant, maybe just, I wouldn't say major trauma or something, but just maybe events, and the child interpreted that as a problem and then maybe even repeated small things. And so speaking was associated with anxiety and something bad, and then they just developed that. Or it's also a freeze response, so a reaction to anxiety, not necessarily like you usually hear fight or flight, but more freeze, like you kind of become immobile and unable to speak, so to say.
Yes.
You have the words in your mind, but you don't say them aloud.
Yes, and of course that freeze response is about almost being invisible, isn't it? Not moving, not speaking, in the hope that the danger or the predator, will pass you by and not see you. So how would we recognise potential selective mutism in a client? What would the signs be? I mean, I guess one of the signs is going to be that they don't speak, but that's not unusual for teenage clients. I was a school counsellor for a long time, and it took young people some time to find their voice. But in terms of selective mutism, how would we recognise it?
Yeah, in a young child, when it starts, that parents, for example, see it first. You would have a child that is very loud and outgoing and, I don't want to say normal at home, speaking with parents or siblings, but when this child comes to nursery or school, they will become like a different person and they won't speak with anyone. So there's this difference in what the person does, how they behave, that parents would possibly notice, but teachers maybe would not know what the child does at home. And then people usually think it's shyness and don't do anything, which is not necessarily the right approach. When the person becomes older, it gets more ingrained, and maybe then they develop something like low profile SM. So what I just said, they don't speak at all in certain situations, that's called high profile SM. But low profile is like when the person is able to just respond minimally, maybe with one word or with a lot of I don't know, but they know they need to react somehow, or there's a problem when they get older, for example. And then in teenagers or even adults, which happens when there's no appropriate support, so it doesn't go away on its own, then you have usually things like they're unable to give a presentation in front of the class or at work even, or they don't participate in group discussions. They struggle with speaking up and being confident and assertive and things like that. And that's so easy that people just don't understand that and think that is the person's choice, that they don't participate in the way they could and they're underestimated. So that's what happens. And then that affects all areas of life, not just education, work, relationships, friendships, all these things, because they are unable to speak freely and create these relationships and these social interactions.
That sounds incredibly sad that people just kind of disappear. Low profilism, they just fail to be seen and disappear from view, which feels incredibly sad. So how might we help a client who's lived with the experience of selective mutism? What interventions are helpful?
Yeah, I would say the most important thing is a understanding, friendly, kind environment around this person, including everyone involved. So for a child, that would be teachers, parents, a therapist, maybe the school, like really everybody. So you don't want anyone say, why are you so quiet? Or anyone putting any pressure on the person to speak that could destroy any progress. So you just want to educate everyone what they should do, because there are a few simple practical things you can do to help, and there are things that are not so helpful, what people might do if they don't know. Like I said, force a person to say something or feel personally offended or something like that, because people just don't understand it. So that's things you can do. Just give that person space and time to open up and to just be there, and maybe don't expect verbal communication at first, and then support the person as best you can.
Yes, so don't try and force them to speak, but I guess what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but also make sure that they're seen. In other words, pay attention to them, include them, make sure that they're seen, because I guess there could be a tendency for people who don't speak, for them to be missed or lost.
Yeah. For example, you can give them a task that doesn't require speaking, or you don't want to single anyone out. So, for example, at school, you could give the entire group the same way of communicating, maybe by showing a sign or something, so that it's really normal that all the children do this, and not just the person who struggles. So that, and telling them that it's okay. Everybody has anxiety and they are able to speak, that they just don't do this yet in this particular situation. So kind of normalizing things and giving them a way to develop when they're ready.
Yes, I like that idea of that inclusion. So everybody lives that person's frame of reference. So my grandson does a lot of pointing. He's an expert at pointing at things. And that's what we do. We point, to get him involved in a conversation if we can. It's not always easy. We point at things, and we he'll point at them and we'll point at them and we'll say that's this is that. So I guess to some extent it's like learning another language. It's encouraging people to learn the way that the person who is selectively mute communicates in, because they will be communicating, just won't be speaking words and phrases. So I like that inclusion idea, to make someone feel seen, and also to get other people to understand their frame of reference. That's a really good idea. Now, in therapy, we sometimes use open questions to elicit a response. Closed questions are ones where you say yes or no, and they don't really go anywhere. How you feel? Are you feeling happy today? No. Okay, you feeling sad today? No. You could go on forever using closed questions. An open question would be, how do you feel today? Or what feelings are you experiencing? But how would we work if we have a client who struggles with open questions?
Yeah, one way is, for example, offering different ways of communication. So you could allow them to write down things, maybe send an email. So that could be a way where they could open up. But in terms of the questions, it's probably a good idea to start with a closed question, because an open question is just so broad and you can answer anything. And when you struggle, then it is helpful when you have this. I can only say yes or no, or I can indeed use gestures like nodding or shaking the head, so that doesn't even require speech. So that would be the easiest thing. Another thing is you can have answer choices in the question already, so you don't say, what did you eat? Which is an open question. You say, did you eat oranges or apples or something else? So you're giving an answer with that already, and then you just have to repeat that word, for example. So there's a kind of like a process that you can go through depending on where the person is and how much they can say, and kind of work towards the open questions. So when they can answer, then you can have a normal conversation. But if not, you're kind of trying to make it easier at first by doing this. And also wait for a few seconds if there's no answer. And because people with SM usually hesitate a lot.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, because in all the counselling training manuals, books, training courses, they always say, and I've done this as a trainer, never use closed questions. But it seems that if you're working with someone with selective mutism, closed questions are really useful, because it allows people to make a minimal response. And I'm kind of guessing they're not going to get overwhelmed by having to use a whole phrase or a sentence. They could use a minimal response. It's very different to traditional counselling training, isn't it?
You don't want to ask a lot of direct questions, because that puts a lot of pressure on the person. I have to answer, and there's more and more questions, and that leads to closing up more, and then they don't speak. So that's kind of the tendency. So you want to make it nice. So for a young child, for example, you can start with drawing something, or so they don't need to speak at all at first, and then you kind of build that relationship. And also with the parent, so when they speak with the parent, you can start with this, and then kind of slowly integrate the other person with whom they don't speak. So that's called sliding in. You kind of gradually allow this other person in and then fade the parent out, and you kind of achieve that the person can speak to a new person.
How interesting. It's a sliding in. So what you would do is you would maybe get the parents, get them to speak with the parent, and then you can inject yourself into the conversation. Would I be right in that? Sort of, they may speak to the parent, and then slowly you can introduce yourself in. Is that how? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a specific way. Like you just wait in front of the door, open the door, come closer, maybe just pretend you're busy in the room somewhere, and then you approach and somebody join in. And so you don't do it just like that. It's really in a certain way, so that the person can allow this other person to be there and then start to interact with them.
I mean, this sounds like a completely different approach to therapy than I literally have ever come across, because like a lot of people, selective. The only time I've come across selective mutism is with my grandson. I've never come across anyone in my whole life who was selectively mute. So hearing this, it's really valuable information. I wonder, you've used a lot of terms, you've used a lot of references to applied skills, like sliding in. Is there any form of training or any kind of literature that therapists could refer to help them with this? Because it sounds like you've got to retrain yourself. Some of it, quite frankly, is counterintuitive to normal counselling training. Certainly things like the not using the open questions, the sliding in. Is there any training or literature that someone listening to this who may be working with someone who's selectively mute can look to be able to help them in this way? Have you ever come across any? Is what I'm asking?
Yeah. I think a very good book is the Selective Mutism Resource Manual, 2nd edition by Maggie Johnson and Alison Vinchens. So that's really a comprehensive book explaining everything and giving you materials for assessment and what you can do. And there's also material online that you can access when you have this book. So that's really helpful for parents, therapists, or anyone who wants to know about that. And there's also organizations for selective mutism, like SMIRA in the UK. They have a website with a resource list, or SMA in the US, where you can learn things and find out more, maybe find a therapist or whatever you want to know.
So that's really, really useful resources you've shared. And if you want to find links to those resources, if you go to counsellingtutor.com, hit the podcast tab, look for episode 334, and in the show notes, we'll put a link to all those resources and indeed the book Antje has penned. It's been a real joy to speak with you, to get a real insight into how to work with someone who is selectively mute, so they're not lost and they're not discounted in the world, and also that they can be included. I think that's something I'm going to personally take away from the podcast, having a grandson who is selectively mute. The book, Annika and the Treasure of Iceland, is available both in Kindle and in paperback, and it's available for download now or for purchase now. And it just goes for me to say, Dr. Antje Bothin, thank you so much for joining us.
And if you're interested in that book, you can find the link to the book in our show notes, and you can find those at counsellingtutor.com. Click on podcast, go to episode 334. All the details are there for you. And we now move out of Practice Matters right into those student services, recognizing you, students, on your formal journey to become a counsellor or a psychotherapist. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Can't tell you how many times Rory and I have heard counselling students say that learning skills and knowing that they're using them effectively is really, really challenging. The reason for this is because we don't get to see another counsellor using skills in a real live session. In reality, this means that we're asked to learn something that we can never see demonstrated in a real setting, and it's no wonder that many of us are left feeling unsure. If you want to see counselling skills used in real sessions by qualified therapists, so this is real sessions, real presentations, and real use of skills, then go to counsellingskillsacademy.com. There's some free videos on skills, including a full live session that you can have a look at. Gain the competence and the confidence of knowing you're using your counselling skills effectively. Just visit counsellingskillsacademy.com. And today in Student Services, we're revisiting an age-old question. And it's usually worded like this. Happens on our Facebook group. Jump into Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, come and join the group. That's where we have these discussions. And the question usually goes, I'm in placement. How many clients can I see? I've got 100 hours to get, so I want to see as many as I can, as quickly as I can. And of course, today we're going to be speaking about what is the ideal client load, because you don't want to be burning yourself out. What's your thoughts on this, Rory?
Well, I think I'm going to rewind a little bit. You know, for those who are meeting clients, are going to be working with clients for part of their practice to gain their practice hours, they will have been through usually an introduction to counselling, where they'll be doing counselling skills with peers, then a certificate in counselling, where they'll be doing counselling skills with their peers, and then they'll be doing either a diploma or maybe a degree or a master's degree, where they'll be doing counselling skills with their peers. And the key thing is here, Ken, with your peers. And what happens is, and we used to say it when we taught, was that as people go through training, they tend to know the rules of engagement. So they're not, skills practice is not therapeutic practice. It's using a set of skills. And when students go into practice, the learning curve of applying their skills and their knowledge is huge. It's literally like going vertical in a plane. You know, you pull the stick back and you whoosh into the air and you're vertical, because it's a massive step change to move from working with your peers, where they all know the rules, they all know, you know, they all finish on time, they won't turn up under the influence of alcohol or drugs or prescribed medication, or they won't turn, or they turn up. You know, some clients don't turn up at all. It's a massive step, and add to that the fact you've got to negotiate the therapy room. You've got to work in another organisation and understand their policies and procedures. Could be a lot to take in. It's a very steep learning curve. So I think we always spoke about this, Ken. We always said, look, start with one client. Just start with one client, and then go and see a supervisor and bed yourself in, and then slowly, maybe after a few weeks, take another client on. And I think that sometimes I see in the Facebook group people saying, well, I'm going to have 4 clients. There is some challenges with that. The first thing is, if you have 4 clients in your diary as a student, you've never counselled before, and you have a very bad experience with your first client, you then got to go and see 3 others. So that might have a bit of a knock-on effect. So my advice is, or my observation, I don't give advice, my observation is, start off with one client, then go to your supervisor, book a supervision very close after you see your first client, then talk it through, and then build yourself up. Now, the other practical thing about having a client load as a student is that if you have 4 clients, you're going to have 2 hours of supervision, because students are more highly supervised than qualified practitioners. And I think we spoke about supervision hours in another podcast. So if you're taking on 4 clients, you're going to have to think about how much supervision you need, and that is a cost, and also it's the time, and is your supervisor available? So I think slowly is the way to go. And I will acknowledge, because there'll be a lot of students listening to this, who'll say, well, that's all right for you, Rory, but we've got to get 100 hours in, and we've got to get it in within 2 years. And I will say to those people who are saying that, pointing at their speakers or pointing at their smartphones, I will say to them, it was the same for me. It was the same for me. It was the same for Ken. It was the same for any student. We're all under the same parameters. But I think a good start is it sets you off. You know, I've known students who've had a very tricky start to their practice, and it's took them a long time to reset, you know, because it hits confidence, and it can be very tricky. So I don't know what tutors are saying nowadays, but I suspect there'll be a lot of tutors furiously nodding their heads and agreeing with us, Ken, that you started off easily and then working your way into practice is probably the best way to go.
Yeah, it's interesting because often it's about revisiting the question, you know. So if you're a student and you're about to go into placement, if you're asking yourself, how many clients am I going to have? It's really about, how is it going to be seeing real clients? It's a different question. And you want to get used to seeing the clients, stepping out of the simulator, the flight simulator, and getting behind getting into the cockpit of a passenger plane where there are others involved in the journey. It's a whole different experience. And you want to be kind to yourself. You have a whole career ahead of you. You really do, to see many clients and have many thousands of successful client hours. But those early steps, just be kind to yourself. And the truth is, as I found that my confidence was building, confidence was building within my placement practice, I was able to take on more clients because I could go to that question of actually how many clients can I see, and I then discussed that with my course tutor. I checked with my the awarding body that issued my training of how many hours they didn't have any caps in. I spoke to my supervisor, I spoke to my placement, and a lot of people were involved in that decision making. It wasn't just me going, I wonder how many clients I can see. And I listened to the good advice from others, which hopefully you're hearing now from Rory and my ramblings as well. Everything you said, Rory, is 100% right. When you get out there, that first client session and those first few client sessions are where you find your feet, and it's where you gain your confidence. And if you can be kind to yourself and give yourself the time to contemplate before the client comes in, the time afterwards to write up your notes and to process what you've been through, and then to take that to supervision, and you give yourself time around that, it develops, I think, a more robust and I don't know. It's just if you force grow a plant, you'll get its height quickly, but it might be a little bit straggly and lacking in some areas. But if you just let it grow at its proper intended level, it comes up just perfectly and strong enough. And there is 100 hours to get in. And here's the thing: you're going to get the 100 hours. You will get them. You just will. And eventually it's going to come to the time where you go, I need to up my client load because I have some do not attends as well. Remember, about 30% of my client load when I was in placement was do not attends. But you adjust it as you go. So it's like getting in a car and learning to drive. You don't see how fast the car can go as your first exercise. You first go, let me get used to this, let me learn how to drive, let me take it slowly and go to the shops in the car.
I don't know if I was going to share this, but I think I was thinking about how to put this across, and when I was 14 or 15, my dad, it was a military man, he joined a shooting club, and he was a pistol marksman. He won trophies and things like that. And I was kind of interested in that. And I said, can I shoot? And my dad was like, kind of, really? He was kind of looking at me, and it was very serious. It was a very serious sport. Firing a pistol is a very serious sport. And eventually he said, yeah, okay, come on down. And I remember taking me down, and he gave me his Vostok pistol. He had a Russian Olympic sportsman's pistol called a Vostok, a Magellan Vostok. And it had a magazine in it with six cartridges, and he unloaded it and put one cartridge in, and put the magazine into the gun, pulled the slide back, loaded one bullet effectively into the gun, and I shot one bullet, and that was it.
Yeah.
That was my entire day of shooting. And he stood behind me and with his hand on my shoulder, and he taught me through it, and I pulled the trigger, and there's the almighty bang, and I missed the target, and that was the end of my shooting career. And I went away and thought about it. And I guess that's the thing, isn't it? When you work, you're absolutely right. When you're working with clients, you're working in a really different environment, and that client will see you as their therapist. They won't see you as a student therapist or someone who's just started. They will see you as their therapist. They will say to their friends, I'm going to see a counsellor. And that's all that happens as a counsellor. And you're signed off as fit to practice. You're signed off as someone competent to work with clients at the beginning of your career. So take it easy on yourself, and, don't rush it. And in fact, it's interesting, isn't it? We should apply that same theory that John Schleen, Roger's student, talked about, the opening of the poppy. When the poppy opens, he used to watch them opening, and he said he never forced the leaves. He said, because you just damaged it. You just damaged the poppy. Just let it open. So, yeah, be kind to yourself. And as Ken said, wisely said, you will get that 100 or 120 hours. It varies from course to course. But, make the journey really meaningful for yourself. Don't put too much pressure on yourself, because at some point at the end of 2 and a bit years, you'll stand there with your certificate which says counsellor on it.
Yeah, that's the goal, isn't it? And then you have that certificate, and you can go on to make the difference that you chose to make when you started this journey. You can fulfill your why. And the bit that I'm going to come back to as we kind of end this subject is what Rory mentioned about your fellow students know the rules. They know what a counselling skill is. They know that they should bring a little bit of information and they should leave some time for you to respond. And I mentioned earlier about flight simulators. Well, in flight simulators, they simulate difficult, challenging situations for the pilot so they can learn how to work with those. And I wonder in counselling training if we maybe don't do that. We just say, right, break up and do skills, and you just get to work with people that know the rules. But I've certainly been with clients who don't know the rules, and they don't know what to say, and they don't know how they feel, and they might sit there going, well, you tell me what to do. I don't know what to do. And it can leave you kind of wondering in a bit of a different situation. And of course, the best thing is, and I learned it from my first supervisor, your clients will teach you. They really will. Yes. I know we go to university or college or wherever you're doing your training to learn to become a counsellor, but your actual real counselling training comes from your clients, and they're going to throw those more challenging situations your way. They are. And you want to have the time and you want to have the space to be able to work with that respectively. And if you've got back-to-back clients and you get, knocked off your track, like you say, Rory, going into the second one, feeling unsure, what does that project? Are we able to really show up, purely for that client? If we're carrying a bit of another client session, like, I could have said that and I could have done that and I got this wrong. Whereas if you're seeing those clients in the beginning in isolation and then able to speak to your tutor and being able to speak to your practice manager, being able to speak to your supervisor, getting normalization. And we see it, I know, Rory, you supervise some clients, some students in seeing their first clients. I've done the same. And it's an interesting time. It's a time of wonderful development. Don't be frightened of it from what we're sharing here. Be excited about it. You deserve to be. But don't overload your plate. Just take it easy in the beginning. There'll be plenty of time to ramp it up as you gain maturity, I guess, is what my thoughts are. Really.
Yeah, just take it easy. Don't worry that other peers have got more hours in than you. It's, the road is long and ultimately the race is against yourself, and you will get there. You will get there. You'll accrue your client hours, and the more positive the journey, I think the better. I think that early formation of a student therapist skill set, that forming of becoming a therapist, is very, very important. Like growing plants, if they're grown properly, then you're going to get a nice, lovely bright plant, if you like. I don't know too much about plants, but I'm thinking of sunflowers.
We have many
that's
bright
not my
ones
area
here,
of expertise. Yes, I could dig in a hole for myself quickly. But if you try and force it, it can lead to very difficult things. So that's my final thoughts. Just take it easy on yourself.
Yes, and I want to leave you with a really good resource. It's on our website, counsellingtutor.com. Just go to the search bar and search First Counselling Session. If you're a student and you're going into placement soon, put in First Counselling Session. We've got a really good article and a handout about preparing yourself and kind of getting the mindset right for that very first counselling session. This has been episode 334 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started with ethical, sustainable practice, Managing Triggers and Flashback, a guide for counsellors. We talked about being a 21st century counsellor and the skills that we need to be of service to our clients. In Practice Matters, I caught up with Dr. Antje Bothin, who talked about Annika and the Treasure Island and how it links to a deeper understanding of selective mutism. And then finally, Ken and myself discussed the ideal client load for students, making sure that the journey from being a student and skills practicer to being a psychotherapeutic person, counsellor, is as easy. That transition is as easy and as pain-free as possible for, I guess, for both yourself and the client. And I'd like to thank you all for your support and your subscriptions and your shares. I know that the podcast is shared widely with people, and people say this is really interesting and we'd like to share it with you. And all the shares and certainly all the comments and the likes we get on the platforms really do make what Ken and myself do worthwhile. We like the feedback, so please keep that coming. And so until next time, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.